Hello, my name is Dr. Michael Glass. I'm the Regional Studies Association's Territorial Chair for the United States. The Regional Studies Association is a learned society concerned with the analysis of regions and regional issues. Through our international membership, we provide an authoritative voice of and network for academics, students, practitioners, and policymakers. You can find out more about the Regional Studies Association, including information on membership, funding opportunities, and events at regionalstudies.org. I'm pleased to present a new installment of our Regionalists on Film series that introduces you to the work of established and emerging regional scholars and their scholarship. Today, it's my special privilege to introduce Grete Gansauer. Grete is a doctoral candidate in human geography at Montana State University. A rural development scholar with an interest in the condition of America's left-behind regions, Grete is using a qualitative approach based in political economy to assess the merit of infrastructure development as a pathway to improving the condition of peripheral and rural regions. Grete, welcome.
Thank you. So happy to be in conversation with you today.
Absolutely. Now, I'd like to begin by asking you how you got interested in researching regions and regional development.
Yeah, I suppose I have two answers to this question, a practical answer and a more academic answer. In a practical sense, between undergrad and my return to graduate school, I worked in rural community development and community organizing in rural communities in the Pacific Northwest, communities which had experienced economic decline following the decline of the timber industry and the mining industry. So I really witnessed some regional scale rural development issues firsthand, which got me kind of thinking about rural development policy interventions at a regional scale. And so this really motivated me to come back to graduate school. So from an academic standpoint, I became interested in regional development and regional studies because I kind of developed this intuitive, instinctive interest in political economy and thinking about relationships between government, state policy, and the economy and how they influenced one another kind of back and forth. And so by finding regional studies, I found a discipline which really studied the spatiality of political economic relationships and also gave me a way to study kind of the place-based dimensions of some of these broader political economic forces.
Got it. So, and that gets to what your work is focused on right now, which really is at the intersection of a few things: rural development, regional inequality, economic geography. Within that, what does that geographic dimension add to your scholarship?
Yeah, I wasn't a geographer before coming back to grad school, and now I'm really glad that I am. I feel that because geography makes spatial dynamics the object of inquiry, that opens up a whole set of questions and a whole kind of space which allows us to interrogate not only the spatial dynamics and spatial extent of structural trends and kind of these broader economic systems and political systems and governments, but then also kind of the place-based expressions of those broader trends. So through geography and a kind of a geographic way of thought, this enables me to examine kind of the intersection between place-specific and historically contingent processes and how they intersect with broader systems and structural dynamics that are going on at global scale. So I feel like geography gives us a tool to witness this, to study and problematize how place dynamic or place specific process intersects with structural trends. And then it also gives us a space to witness and then interrogate the genealogy of how those structural trends fall unevenly across space. So it gives us a way to identify and problematize issues of uneven development, which is really important to my work. And then, when we're looking at spatial unevenness, that kind of then gives us an avenue to question not only how is it produced, but is it fair, and what power relationships kind of go into producing uneven or expressions of uneven development, be that in an economic sense, in a I guess, like government sense, in a way that state policy touches down at the local scale.
So you mentioned place-based dynamics a couple of times, and you find yourself working in central Montana, which is a very rural region. How do those place-based dynamics come to the fore in that context that you're working in right now? And can you give some examples?
Oh, right, of course. Well, I mentioned a little bit my previous kind of professional work in rural communities, which have experienced kind of this like economic debasement almost. So my work is really rooted in resource peripheries in North America and in Montana. So Montana's historic economy has been strongly resource based and export based. So we've primarily exported commodities, including agricultural commodities, timber, energy resources to be consumed in core markets and core regions. And so with some of those with the volatility of commodity markets, particularly over the last few decades, that's kind of created like some situations where we have endemic and kind of chronic economic decline or stagnation in a lot of rural communities around the state, which has become a policy issue at the forefront. So those structural dynamics touch down and kind of also interact with local place-based histories. And that in this case, in Montana, there's a lot of pride locally that's been built up around some identity with these resource industries. So that can make transitioning to new modes of economic organization really challenging and deeply challenging to cultural values in some of the rural communities where I work.
Got it. And I guess one of the things that's really important for some of your policy-facing work, because at the moment for your doctoral research, you're working with Dr. Julia Haggerty at Montana State and looking at federal policy priorities in infrastructure development in central Montana. That includes a recent paper that came out in Territory Politics and Governance. Do you want to say a little bit about that strand of your work and what you feel the rural dimension can add to the current infrastructure turn that's going on in the policy and social sciences?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. First, I'll describe the work, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I hope it contributes to the infrastructure turn and broader infrastructure scholarship. So the paper that was recently published is part of a special issue sponsored by the Network on Infrastructural Regionalism. And it's a case study of this institution, the Central Montana Regional Water Authority, which proposes an extremely long, over 300-mile regional scale pipeline project to serve a very arid region of Montana. As we know, the American West is perhaps known best as an arid region. We are a water-constrained region. Central Montana is also a place which faces water quality impacts due to endemic soil factors, as well as the agriculture industry there. And so this is a place which has high water hardship and does not have guaranteed or universal drinking water access for all residents in the region. So this pipeline proposal that we study really is kind of supposed to be or imagined as a large scale, almost silver bullet to these long-standing histories of regional drinking water hardship. So by studying the governance model and the institutional design of the Central Montana Regional Water Authority, we're really questioning the extent to which, first of all, the pipeline is poised to deliver a universal or equitable drinking water solution for the region, and then also how that could contribute to regional development prospects more broadly, given that kind of this region faces some environmental as well as infrastructural vulnerabilities and longstanding inadequacies. So that's what the paper gets at. And then I hope that, a contribution that we really emphasize here is that this is a rural example of infrastructural regionalism and kind of putting the infrastructure development question in conversation with regional development. And so we hope that this can kind of challenge a broadly held bias among both regional studies and infrastructure studies, which is kind of a bent toward urbanity and the assumption of the urban when studying infrastructure questions and also when studying regional formations as well. So I think, the infrastructure turn in the social sciences, which is really being embraced by regional studies scholars as well, kind of in terms of its knowledge development, really has this strong urban bias in its like lineage, I suppose you could say. And so I hope that this paper, by really problematizing peripherality and rurality and centering that in our analysis of the institutional design and governance structure associated with this project, we can kind of open up a broader conversation and provide a foundation to maybe make another turn within the infrastructure turn towards questioning how has infrastructure and regional development knowledge been developed, and what narratives and problems are potentially obscured when these situations have primarily been studied in urban contexts.
That's tremendous. And I imagine that there's some conversations yet to be had about how contexts like the American rural West can be put in a conversation with non-urban spaces in Europe and elsewhere around the world in terms of what that scholarship can provide in terms of a comparative element.
Definitely. Yeah, I hope I hope that it can be comparative. I mean, obviously, again, I've emphasized the importance of place-based dynamics and change. One significant feature of that, which is often a focal point in regional studies, is the different governance structures and layers of government which exist not only from country to country, but of course from region to region. And so that's could potentially be a limitation in its transferability. But nonetheless, I think there are some dynamics inherent to the rural condition, inherent to isolated, remote, peripheral contexts, which pose challenges to infrastructure provision and development. I mean, like, for example, just the simple distance and span of space which must be covered to provide basic public services to very low populations is a real challenge for any nation to achieve truly universal public service provision that reaches all corners of its territory, including like the very physical margins of society, which are represented by rural spaces and peripheral spaces. So in this paper, we kind of problematize the friction of distance or the social cost of space, and kind of think about how just honestly a very geographic, like how these very truly geographic processes interact with how the system is or designed in a material sense, but also its institutional design as well.
Now, as a graduate student, one of the pleasures of that career stage is being able to delve deep into the literature and thinking about where this is all going as a field. So I'm really excited to ask you this last question, and that is what you're excited about all of the scholarship that is coming out of regional studies these days. Perhaps what sort of opportunities and challenges you'd like to think that regional scholars could address moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. This is a fun question to think about. Predictably, I'm pretty excited about the Left Behind Places discourse, which is evolving. This seems to really be emerging as a focal point for a certain sect of regional studies over the last 5 years or so. I think that this is really important despite potential political motivations, given the rise of populist movements and kind of this increased like flexing of political power coming from these quote left behind geographies. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity to center left behind places, rural places, and peripheral places in regional studies conversations and debates, because regional studies is so good at theorizing relationality, I guess you could say, and theorizing how different physically disparate envelopes of space are nonetheless networked and interconnected with one another through market processes, through governance organizations. And so I think that, by leaving out by certain spaces from the regional studies conversation, it really does the discipline a disservice by under theorizing the full breadth of connectedness, because left behind places and peripheral spaces are very much ingrained in global networks and very deeply connected to core geographies, even in a way that might kind of flip some of the typical dependency narratives, which are often used to classify and characterize resource-dependent economies. So I'm pretty excited about the Left Behind Places conversation. I'm also excited about the opportunity for regional studies to really, and regional scholarship to really contribute meaningfully to policy, to spatial policy for Left Behind Places. I know that this is, regional inequality, spatial inequality is gaining renewed traction as a policy issue on the political agenda, particularly in the UK with their recent leveling up policies under the Johnson administration, and then also with the EU's cohesion policy. I think that there's, a lot of opportunity for policy-facing scholarship and for the discipline to kind of overcome maybe what could be a perennial challenge, which is finding its foothold in truly gaining policy influence. I think this is still a challenge here in the US. Right now, income inequality here is a really big policy issue, as are other inequalities, such as racial inequality is a major political agenda item. But spatial inequality and regional inequality isn't very high on the national political agenda here in the US at the moment. So I think that's a challenge for US scholars and certainly for activists, but I think it's also an opportunity for us to learn from our colleagues in the UK and in Europe in particular about regional and spatial interventions there, and then think about how we might maybe design or emulate similar programs here in the US, where spatial inequality may not have the political traction, but it's definitely a problem.
It certainly does sound like an opportunity space that we can enter, and that's tremendous. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have available to talk with Grete today, but I'd like to thank you for joining us to share your perspective on regional scholarship. I'd also like to encourage all of you to learn more about regional studies and the Regional Studies Association at regionalstudies.org. Grete, would you like to have the last word today?
Thank you so much for joining us, and I don't know, go regional studies.
Thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon.